Support for this episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the lodger was veiled, the face was yellow, and the valley was fearsome, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder what kind of medical practice Dr. Watson actually ran? Or about the number of Holmes's monographs? Or how much the rent was at 221B Baker Street?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 217, Colors in the Canon. Well, hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, I am tickled pink to be here with you today talking about colors. How about you?
Oh, me too. And because we're talking about colors, I've added an extra O to my first name. So I'm still Burt, but we are spelling it, in the approved way.
I'm green with envy. If I added an extra O to my first name, it would be Scoot.
Scoot! Well, we get through the episode relatively quickly.
Well,
it's just a trifle. Our
listeners are probably hankering for that.
Yes.
And are green with envy that they can't hit that fast forward button often enough. So, yeah. You can fast forward through this, or you can listen right away. This is the part where we tell you this show's notes are available at iHost.co/trifles217. And you can reach us as at @IHearOfSherlock on all of the major social networks, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We appreciate you subscribing wherever you get our show, whatever podcatcher you catch us on. If you subscribe to us via email, we update you when a new show is out, and that is pretty much that. Tell somebody about the show, would you? We've got a lot of listeners, thanks to some folks recently sharing the show, and we do welcome you if you are new. Feel free to go back through the back episodes. This is now season 5, but we've got stuff going back all the way to, 2017. That's amazing. And you know what? Just a reminder here, next month we're coming up on our 221st episode 221. What do you think we should talk about on episode 221? Let us know. If you want to shoot us an email, we are trifles at iHearOfSherlock.com, and we'd be happy to take your recommendations. All right, on with the show.
Will be hard not to talk about bees during episode 221.
I need to come up with a stinger for that.
Ow.
Ow. Well, we are talking this episode about colors. And, it strikes me, Burt, that, Conan Doyle, being such a master storyteller and doing so well with setting, right, and giving us a very vivid sense of place and location and time, I should say. It's really something to read the canon and to be just awash in all of the colors that Conan Doyle has placed before us in his narrative.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. And he was heavily influenced by his childhood reading. He was very fond of reading the adventure stories of Captain Mayne Reid, who was an Irish-Scot-American writer. He was an American writer, I think, of Irish or Scots descent, Captain Mayne Reid. But anyway, the whole point was that Mayne Reid would begin each chapter with these great descriptions that put you right in the geography. And in fact, when Conan Doyle wrote an article about his arrival in Africa during the Boer War. He wrote, and I refer to this from time to time in a talk that I do about Conan Doyle. He wrote one of these Main Read-like descriptions. He wrote, "Stand in the pass at Caree and look north in the clear, fresh morning air. Before you lies a great plain, dull green, with white farmhouses scattered here and there. One great ravine slashes it across. Distant hills bound it on all sides, and at the base of those are a line of houses and a steeple. This is Brandfort, 10 miles off, and we're advancing to attack it." And he just puts you right there. Now, that's one of those things where other than the green and the white, you don't really have a tremendous sense of color, but you certainly have a great sense of the landscape.
And that's something, as I was doing the research for this show, looking through various colors that were mentioned, when it comes to green as a color in the Sherlock Holmes stories, most of the mentions of green are landscape related. The patches of green that you saw in the Grimpen Mire, the rolling hills, the shoots of new flowers in the spring. England being such a maritime climate, seeing a lot of rain, of course, the landscape is green and lush. That was one of the things that really struck me the first time I flew to London as we were coming in over the countryside. And this would have been March or so, late March, just being overwhelmed with how much green there was there and how bright it was.
Yes, well, it's a green and pleasant land.
Indeed, pleasant for everyone. Well, before we leave the color green, I do want to explore some other ones. Green was interesting for me because not only was it a major reference of the landscape, as I said, but we also saw green used in almost a chivalric sense. The Green Dragon. The Green Dragon Inn in Shoscombe Old Place was one of the places where Holmes and Watson, I think, made their headquarters as they were away. They were going fishing and, kind of staking out the grounds and everything. But I thought that it was an interesting choice for a name of the inn, the Green Dragon, because after all, they're here to look after the well-being of Sir Robert's sister there, Lady Beatrice. Lady Beatrice was in ill health, and people were wondering about her whereabouts. Of course, the dogs that barked at her, quote unquote, her in the carriage ride, and so Holmes and Watson were there as knights errant, as it were, and staying at the Green Dragon.
Well, yes, and there's a great, if Bob Katz were here, he would probably remind us that the Green Dragon Tavern was a public house located on Union Street in Boston's North End, where the Sons of Liberty, led by Samuel Adams, met. And in fact, Philip Schreffler and I organized a scion called the Green Dragon, and we actually have a lovely pin, a Green Dragon pin.
You did,
but yes, but the whole point of the scion is to meet in places that date back to the Revolutionary era or early American history. And so we're somewhat, I think we managed one or two, we had lunch at France's Tavern or something like that. And it's been, I don't know, the vast redevelopment of the United States has made it difficult to find.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, there was another Green Dragon mentioned in the Canon. Do you know where it was mentioned and what its significance was?
Yes, it's actually lovely. Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's the safe in Charles Augustus Milverton's study. A tall green safe, the firelight flashing back from the polished brass knobs upon its face. This green and gold monster, the dragon which held in its maw the reputations of many fair ladies.
Yeah, and again, what a perfect setup for Holmes and Watson as the knights rescuing the reputations of those ladies from the maw of the dragon. Now we're going a little far afield here in terms of our discussion of color, but in mythology, in storytelling, when princesses were typically guarded by dragons, was this the same kind of prerequisite that unicorns have, that they can only be seen or touched by virgins? Were dragons considered the same?
Well, I don't have a sense of dragons guarding princesses. I have a sense of dragons. Of course, I just immediately think of Grendel and Beowulf and all those old legends. And of course, Grendel was not a dragon, but, of the knight's duty to slay the dragon. And of course, I also think of Mickey Mouse, who had a notable, back in the 30s, Disney did sort of a seminal cartoon of Mickey as, I think, the tailor. Wasn't he the tailor? 7 with 1 blow. And he was referring to, maybe that's not dragons. Maybe that's giants.
Yeah, that was giants. Yeah. No, I think Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam faced off with a dragon in Nighty Night Bugs.
Yeah, but you could see, that it's just sort of central to mythology. And, the dragon being a very magical creature has, there have been some more favorable interpretations of dragons in film and in television programs over the last few years. But, it's sort of, and it's a hop, skip, and a jump, isn't it? From a dragon to Godzilla.
Yeah, it really is. Which is really a hop, skip, and a jump away from our theme here. So let us regroup. We'll listen to the coloring of our sponsor here, and we'll come back right after the break. Stay with us. The Baker Street Journal continues to be the leading Sherlockian publication since its founding in 1946 by Edgar W. Smith. In its pages, you'll find both serious scholarship and articles that play the game. The journal is essential reading for anyone interested in Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and a world where it's always 1895. If you subscribe to the Baker Street Journal, you'll get 4 quarterly issues as well as the Christmas annual. You don't have to be a member of the BSI or of any Sherlockian society for that matter to subscribe to the journal. It's open to anyone who enjoys talking about, reading about, and writing about Sherlock Holmes. And you can also contribute to the BSJ. Only your imagination limits. Your imagination is the only limitation there. So get on the bandwagon and subscribe to the Baker Street Journal this year. Make it an important part of your commitment to the world of Sherlock Holmes. Just go to BakerStreetIrregulars.com and subscribe today. Okay, we're back talking about colors. We jumped right into the color green there, Bert, but I wanted to step back and say, do you know how many stories in the Sherlock Holmes canon have a color in their title? If you had to guess, how many of the 60 stories would you say incorporate a color into their title?
Oh, well, without looking, I would probably guess half a dozen. 10%.
You would be underestimating it. There are 10 stories, really? 10 stories that I've counted that incorporate color.
Excellent.
They are A Study in Scarlet. Right off the bat, we're introduced to color, and we'll get to these in a moment. Study in Scarlet, and then in the Adventures, there are 4 stories out of the 12 that have color in them. The Red-Headed League, the 5 Orange Pips, the Blue Carbuncle, and the Copper Beeches. Right? And then sticking with the metallic, we have Silver Blaze in memoirs, along with Yellow Face. And then the golden pince nez in the return, along with black Peter. And rounding it up, there are none in the case book, and I think in his last bow there is one. It's the red circle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 10, 10 stories. Good. So I really, the Scarlet, studying Scarlet is interesting because to me it sets the tone for the rest of the stories. You're thinking about London and the gray fog and the drab dreariness of what you might see there. And Holmes said there's the scarlet thread of murder running through the colorless skein of life, and our duty is to unravel it. This is very much in the mind of the red thread. I don't know if you've ever heard the term the red thread, but it's that common theme that you can pick out in certain circumstances. And I thought it was interesting that a study in Scarlet should talk about the scarlet thread of murder.
Yeah, I like that too very much. Well, it's one of the things that creative writing instructors tell their classes and students is to kill your darlings. If you write a sentence that you really are happy with and that you think is just, boy, it's this beautifully well-crafted sentence, it's probably getting in the way of your narrative and you should get rid of it. But that is just a beautiful sentence, that one about the scarlet thread of murder. And it is very arty. I mean, just think about what's going on there. The thread which needs to be unraveled, running through the colorless skein. So immediately you've got the contrast between a red thread and a colorless skein of yarn. It's just, the whole sentence is just beautifully put together, the whole bit of dialogue. And I'm so glad it wasn't cut or struck, because it's so very effective. There's a lot packed into that sentence.
There really is. There really is. And similarly, when we get to the sign of 4 and we first meet Mary Morstan, here is the love of Watson's life. And how does she enter? Well, with a plainness and simplicity about her costume, which bore with it a suggestion of limited means. The dress was a somber grayish beige, untrimmed and unbraided, and she wore a small turban of the same dull hue.
Oh, yeah. Well, you should go on.
Well, because I think that's where we really get the contrast, right? Her expression was sweet and amiable, and her large blue eyes were singularly spiritual and sympathetic. And, we see this over and over again in the canon as we look at the color blue. Most of the blues that are mentioned are blue eyes.
Well, but we should dwell for another moment on that description of Mary Morstan, because it's one thing to use color as a descriptor. The carbuncle is blue, the pips come from an orange, blah, blah, blah. But it's another thing where the sensitivity to color and the observation of detail and color and structure tells you something about the character. And so immediately you get the idea that, hey, the narrator is really struck with this person. I mean, the narrator never tells us Mrs. Hudson entered the room, her linen bonnet slightly stained with tea, her fingernail. We have very selective physical descriptions of people in the canon. They're usually painted in a very quick brush, but boy, Mary Morstan, we get quite a picture of her. She's clearly made an impression just by stepping in the room.
Right. And the costume itself, plain, and again, this is, telling us something about Watson, that, he doesn't need ornamentation. And, the costume itself is just the frame. What Watson's interested in is the focus on the picture, the person in the middle of all of that. And how contrasting that those large blue eyes stand out. And who knows, maybe Mary Morstan wasn't just of limited means. Maybe she knew exactly what she was doing, and contrasting her very attractive eyes against this plain pallor of gray and beige.
Yeah. Well, it's worth, too, stopping just for a second and thinking about the context. We just talked earlier about the colorless skein and the scarlet thread. The fact is, all of this is happening in the sitting room. And the sitting room is a place where we do not get regular descriptions of the colors of things. In past Trifles episodes, we've talked about what was on the walls. I think we've talked about the wallpaper. We've talked about the floors. We've talked about the furniture. But in general, Victorian houses, the Victorian color palette was things like ochre and russet and beige and brown and taupe. And the whole idea in those days was that, the house should blend with its natural surroundings, which is why, you get some of the other articles that are in the sitting room. So that was very much a Victorian sensibility. But the point there is that Mary Morstan comes in, with this costume and the gloves and so on. Yeah. And, it's a real big bang. But to the readers, to Watson's readers, at the time when the stories are appearing, that's the sensibility that they would be taking for granted in their minds as they sort of conjured for themselves these scenes.
Sure. Well, as we think about the color blue here, of course, we know the blue carbuncle, the electric blue dress that Violet Hunter wore in the Copper Beeches. But oftentimes, in addition to blue eyes, we read of blue smoke. The blue smoke from a pipe, from a cigarette, the smoke rings. Again, literally adding to the atmosphere in which we found ourselves. Because who hasn't been in a room that has been filled with smoke, or where someone lights up a cigar, a pipe, or a cigarette? It adds to the aura surrounding us. Interestingly, Holmes had a purple dressing gown in the blue carbuncle and a blue dressing gown in the man with the twisted lip. And we've talked about Holmes's many colored dressing gowns before. A couple of details that I hadn't really noticed before as I was looking through the colors here. Do you remember when Watson went to get Toby in The Sign of Four? Who did he have to go see?
Oh, I don't remember the name.
Mr. Sherman, old Mr. Sherman, right? And you get a sense he's surrounded by all these animals. Well, there was a detail about Mr. Sherman that he was wearing blue-tinted glasses. I hadn't noticed that before, but again, it adds to the just kind of the bohemian, odd character, as it were. Someone wearing, I guess the equivalent of what we would now call sunglasses. He was wearing blue-tinted glasses when Watson saw him. And then in the Boscombe Valley Mystery, when Turner finally made his appearance, he sat down to talk to Holmes and Watson. This is a man who, of course, was not well, physically not well. And Watson noticed his a particular shade of blue in his nostrils. The man who entered was a strange and impressive figure. His slow limping step and bowed shoulders gave the appearance of decrepitude, and yet his hard, deep-lined, craggy features and his enormous limbs showed that he was possessed of unusual strength of body and character. His tangled beard, grizzled hair, and outstanding drooping eyebrows combined to give an air of dignity and power to his appearance. But his face was of an ashen white, while his lips and the corners of his nostrils were tinged with a shade of blue. It was clear to me at a glance that he was in the grip of some deadly and chronic disease.
Well, it's interesting, the diagnostic use of color in that description.
Ashen white, blue lips. Yeah. Well, one final bit of color I wanted to note, and this comes from the Valley of Fear. We have a couple of accessories that are worn by the members of the Scourers. Watson tells us of an inner guard who wore a green and gold sash across his chest. Green and gold, that gives us a sense of some kind of official role. I think you would agree that when greeted with someone, particularly as a guard at a door, this makes you it gives you a sense that there's something official going on. And then when we get to Boss McGinty, he sat at the head of the table with a flat black velvet cap upon his shock of tangled black hair and a colored purple stole around his neck, so that he seemed to be a priest presiding over some diabolical ritual.
Oh, I like that. That's very good.
And we don't even have to infer it from that. I mean, Watson just hands it to us up on a platter. That's exactly what it would reflect to me if I were reading that without the that added phrase at the end. Yeah.
Well, there's a good deal of cleverness in the selective use of color and some of the things that you've mentioned, particularly the combinations, the black hair and the purple stole and so on. In the world of marketing and art and design, the Pantone matching system is a color standard, so that if you draw or create artwork and move it into production, the colors can remain true even through printing. And every year there's a color of the year. Well, I think for 2021, the Pantone folks have picked two colors. One is yellow and the other is an ultimate gray. And together, I don't remember their description of all of this, but it's fortitude and strength and a little optimism from the yellow, perhaps, which is what we need probably in this time.
We do.
But you see that, just looking back to Conan Doyle and those selective marryings, those choices, those details, those little pops of color that make a scene come alive.
Mm. Well, we could keep coloring inside and outside the lines here, but this is just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You take my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Well, I am still curious about the conditions.
My little fads and fancies, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, they're nothing at all. My wife is very fond of a particular shade of electric blue. And she would like you to wear such a dress indoors in the morning.